Hi everyone, I'm Jonathan and welcome to the Coniferous Tree Walk. We'll start with these trees here. This is the good starting point. We have 7 trees. I'll give you a starting point. There's 7 spruce trees here. 6 of them are the same. 1 of them is different. Do you think you can spot the odd one out? Yeah, okay. If you pull a needle off, you could see at the base, there's actually a little bit left on the stem. It's a little rough section. So you pull them off, and that's a characteristic of the spruce trees. They're singly attached to the stem, and they have these little knobs that are left over if you pull one off. Spruce trees tend to have both sexual cones on the tree at the same time. So they have the pollen cones and the seed cones. However, the seed cones are going to be higher up on the tree than the pollen cones. And that is to stop the tree from self-pollinating. So the pollen cones are going to be on the bottom, and when the wind comes, it blows it away from the tree and it stops the pollen from just dropping directly down onto itself, onto its own seeds. Each layer on this cone is a seed, right?
Right.
So what happens is the pollen will land on the cone, and there's like receptors between the cone and the pollen. And if the receptors match, it takes a year between pollination and germination. So the pollen lands on the cone, and then it has to develop this thing called a pollen tube, which goes through the basically it's the nutrients of the seed development. So the pollen will develop a cone, it'll pollinate in the spring, spend the year developing that pollen tube, develop the cone over the next summer, and then the summer after that or the spring after that is when the seeds are released. So it takes 2 to 3 years for a cone to become fully developed. So if you're looking for the cones, you always want to be looking at the tops of the trees to find the seed cones. This is a white spruce. They're native to all Canada, and they have, like you said, the light grayish green leaves, needles, and they have the odorous smell when crushed. If you take one of them off, you can roll it between your fingers. That's the indication of that cross section that I was telling you about. So being able to roll it between your fingers tells us that it has 4 sides to the needle, compared to other coniferous trees that are flattened and would have 2 or 3 sides. These ones have distinct resinous smell when they're crushed. Yeah, so the color is a lot lighter in these ones. These trees can grow up to 25 meters tall, and they tend to be about 200 years average in age. And they actually have a lot of genetic diversity. So if you see a white spruce from out west, it's going to be very different than a white spruce that you would see, or not very different, but there could be differences, visual differences from out west to out here. And then if we come over to compare to the other species, these are, the needles are a little bit less, are a little bit shorter. They have a little bit of a curvature to them, and they're quite a bit more pointed. These ones are a little bit more blunted than what you see on these, so careful with that. They're native to Europe, and were planted. They were introduced to Canada as a reforestation issue. And my common distinguishing feature are the drooping branches. So you see these the primary branches come straight out and even swoop up. And then all the secondary branches that come off of them, they really hang down, kind of drooping like. And that's the key indication of Norway spruce. The other key indication, looking at this one, we can see the cones, is that they have really large cones. These cones can be up to 20 centimeters long, compared to the smaller cones on the white spruce. I saw one in here that are quite a bit significantly smaller. Yeah, so yeah, just look for the droopy branches here and the nice small, this is like a typical spruce tree. So we got another tree here. Looking at the arrangement of the needles, again, the first thing I look at, they're kind of, you have to kind of ignore the new growth on this tree, because you can see along the new growth at the ends, the needles are individually placed along the stem, but then when you get farther along, they become more clumped. And these are, I mean, I'm not going to count them all, but it's obviously clumps of more than 10. We only have the one native tamarack. Larix larencina is the name of is the Latin name. Yeah, and it's characteristic of having these 10 tufts of 10 or more needles. They're really soft. And then if you look at the cones, they're also really, really tiny cones as well. They're with soft, rounded edges. Yeah, these are mostly found in like moist, wet, boggy areas. Sphagnum bogs are very typical to see them. And they live to be about 150 years old.
They become very tall, do they?
They can get up to 25 meters tall, so they can get pretty big.
Okay.
They lose their leaves seasonally, yep. This is Colorado spruce. Other common name would be blue spruce, and the Latin name is Picea pungens. These are actually large trees, and they're native to the rocky regions of the U.S. Obviously, they were planted because of the nice color that they have, but the funny thing is you could actually just if you take a couple needles, you could actually just rub the color right off. Yeah, they turn right back into green colored leaves. But if you look underneath, you can kind of see that blue color has disappeared a little bit, and it's only on the new growth that it's really blue. So it's definitely some sort of protection to the new growth, whether it's solar or predation. That's what it would be. Yeah, these trees can live up to 600 years old as well. So they grow very large and very old. So we only have one pine tree on this tour. Do you know what kind of pine this is?
Looks like white.
Yes. So white pine it is for sure. White pine is easy to tell because it's the only native 5-needled species. The way I remember that is white has 5 letters in it, and the white pine has 5 needles. That's the way I've remembered it for as long as I can remember. They're native to, again, this eastern region of Canada and the northern east region of the U.S., and they can be 30 meters tall and grow up to about 200 years old. These trees were historically used and heavily harvested to make masts for ships in the 1700s. And more recently, the wood is used for doing woodwork and pattern work with wood, because the grain is so tight in the wood that it shrinks very little when it dries out. So you can use it to make patterns and cabinetry, which require a lot of detail woodwork. Yeah, all pines will fall into that category of having 2, 3, or 5 needles, and this is the only native one that has 5. So we got a couple of trees here. They're relatively small, but they can get very large. I called it a fossil tree because this species was thought to be extinct up until 1945, when a couple individuals were discovered in central China. So that's why I call it a fossil tree. But not a fossil anymore. They're commonly planted around for their nice light. They're really soft needles. And they have a nice green color with that bright red bark. And this is a Dionne redwood. And they can grow really, really big, up to 35 meters tall and 300 centimeters in diameter. So that's a massive tree. If we look at the actual veining and the leaf configuration of the trees, we could see, which is kind of interesting, there's a prominent mid vein that goes along the top of the needle as well along the bottom. You can look over here. The other interesting thing is if you look at how the needles actually attach to the stem, they kind of overlap each other in alternate patterns. So the needle actually continues down past where the stem starts and into the bottom part of the next leaf as well.
They're like deciduous leaves, aren't they?
Yeah, they're incredibly soft. But this is coniferous. Coniferous indeed. Huh. But yeah, this is eastern red cedar. So,
how do you know a cedar from a juniper?
Red cedar is juniper.
It is a juniper?
Juniperus virginiana.
Okay. Okay.
So what's the difference between a juniper and a cedar?
It's the same. They are.
It's the same.
Same.
All junipers are cedars,
Yeah.
I guess.
These aren't real cedars. Is the thing. It's actually a juniper. So you see, obviously, you get the blue juniper berries on them, and they are short trees. They grow only up to about 10 meters tall. If you kind of feel them, they are sharp. If you run your fingers along it opposite of the leaves, you could feel the points of the scales. And they're paired on either side, and they alternate between the two. So they would have two scales like this, and then they would be overlapped by two scales on this side, and they alternate back and forth like that. Cedars actually have, like true cedars, we don't actually have any here in North America. They're all more Mediterranean species, and they actually look more like the tamarack. They have those tufts of needles instead of looking like this.
So the white cedar is not a cedar?
Nope. The white cedars over here, it's something completely different. It's not even juniper.
Okay.
So this true cedar genus is Cederis, and this the white cedar belongs to the Thuja family. So this is Thuja occidentalis, the eastern white cedar. It's native to eastern Canada and northern U.S. But the way to tell the difference between the two is these scales are actually really flat compared to the red cedar. What else do I have? These also don't grow that tall. Only about 15 meters tall. However, small stunted trees have been found in the Niagara escarpment that are up to 700 years old. So these trees live very long. The only issue that they really face is they're prone to heart rot, which is a bacterial infection that gets in through a wound of the tree, and it actually rots the inside of the tree first outwards. So that's one of the things that will affect the tree most commonly, is this heart rot. So this is the real exception to all of the conifers, all the gymnosperms. And I'm sure you know, or maybe you know what it is. Do you know what kind? Ginkgo, yeah.
It's unbelievable that that's a gymnosperm.
Yeah, yeah. It's weird. But the reason it does that is because the fruits that they develop, this one actually has one up there, or a couple up there, which is weird. And I'll explain why in a second. But if you look closely, there's some really round green balls that are right kind of where, if you look where these connect here, they come out that way, and there's just like a ball here. There's one directly above me right here.
Okay.
Yeah, I see it.
So again, those do not develop from a flower. So that's why they fall under the gymnosperm category. The other interesting thing that I said about the fruit is that these are sex trees. So there's a male and a female version. And it's very uncommon to see the female trees planted because of the development of the fruits. These fruits, when they drop from the trees, they tend to rot, and the flesh of them are really, really gross smelling.
The smell is unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's repulsive. It's
Yeah.
It's worse than skunk and rotting flesh and skunk
Cabbage.
Yeah,
Oh.
that's what I've heard it. I've heard it described as smell of rotting flesh.
Really
That's what I heard.
And so the fact that this has a, I guess not a fruit,
Yeah.
a
Fleshy seed coat.
a fleshy seed coat. Well, does that mean this is a female?
This is, I would assume so, yeah. Yeah, and this is actually tiny for a ginkgo. Really, really small. They can live up to, the average age of a ginkgo is between 800 and 1,500 years.
Oh.
And it's not uncommon to see 3,000-year-old
Are they
trees.
Asian originally?
Yes, they're native to China. Wasps love them, love the berries. Wasps, they just go wild for them. All right, this is another pine that we have. Not one, but two needles attached. And that's kind of one of the traits that we have. It's two needles, and the fact that they're close together and they're kind of twisted lets me know that it's a Scots pine. One that you might confuse it with would be a jack pine, and they have similar style, they look similar, and they have similar style needles, but their needles will be very separated on the tree. They'll be a very prominent V shape. These trees, they typically grow tall and straight in Europe, but for some reason when the settlers came over, they had a bad seed bunch, and when they planted them in North America, they typically have this kind of weird kind of curvature growth to them, where they'll have kind of short and stubby with large secondary branches coming off of it, as opposed to the very straight, good lumber that you would get from the Scots pine in Europe. So they're very different.
But these instead of the native white pine.
They grow really fast. The conditions are a little bit better. Plantation species are always weird. They really, especially like early settlement plantation species, like this. They're like, oh, this is what we used at home. We're bringing them over. We're going to plant them here. It just becomes more and more common. Yeah, yeah. They're not super invasive or anything. Yeah.
And it's Scots pine. I always called it Scotch pine.
Yeah. I know in my book it definitely says Scots with an S, but I've definitely heard people say Scotch. And then this is one of my favorite looking trees in the area. It's just got one of those great shapes to it. And this is different than what you might think it is. Another blue or Colorado. It's not a spruce at all, actually. It's got longer needles. And so they are all individually attached there, but when you pull one of these off, you can see it doesn't leave that rough section like the other ones, like the spruce do. And then the other thing to note is that they are kind of come out in this flat kind of plane. When they don't leave that scar there, it's kind of lets me know that it's a fir tree. So this is actually a white fir. And yeah, like I said, they don't leave that leaf scar. They have these, they're a lot softer. And remember at the very beginning, I said you could roll the spruce needles between your fingers. These ones are flat, and you actually tend to not be able to roll them as easily. So that's kind of, you would pull one off and try to roll it between your fingers. And if you can, great. And if not, it's most likely a fir tree. They go all the way around
Do
the
they? Okay.
tree, but they tend to only display themselves like more flat than a spruce tree would.
Okay.
These trees grow really big. I'm trying to find the exact number here. But they were planted. They're not native to this area. They're native out west, and they were planted obviously for the nice leaf structure or needle structure. Yeah, native to the mountainous regions of western U.S. and Canada. They can grow up to 30 meters tall, and they can be up to 9 feet in diameter at the base. So they get nice and large. And this one is tiny. Always give them a smell. This has a good smell too. If you like, this is real Christmas tree like smell. I think balsam firs are the typical Christmas tree ones. This is kind of a fun one here. This tree. We won't go in to look at it. Yeah. But this is actually a yellow cedar or a Nootka. Yeah, so it's a yellow cedar. I'll stick with that name. And they don't all have this droopy branches, but they have the flat scales like the white cedar, and they also have the very rot-resistant wood as well. They were planted here for ornamental reasons, because they have the book. When I read in the book, it said they were planted because they have a strong crown, and I'm not exactly sure what that means in this example, but it doesn't mean anything to me. I'm not sure if it means anything to you guys, but look at the strong crown and admire it. They can be 25 meters tall and occasionally much bigger, and they're slow growing and require lots of moisture and water to grow. So another cedar that's not a cedar is this one here. It's a salt cedar. I don't even think it's an actual, I think it's a deciduous tree because it grows flowers. But just to throw more not cedar cedars at you.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us, and hope to see you guys again.